The tangled web of a billion-dollar fraud, a deception of such breathtaking scope that it ensnared corporate titans and even drew in the U.S. government, finds an almost surreal cultural marker in the presence of Armando Christian Perez, the global music sensation known as Pitbull. To truly grasp how Mr. Worldwide became an unwitting accessory to the spectacle of this colossal con, we must first trace the serpentine path of its mastermind, the indomitable and ultimately doomed Jeff Carpoff. Our saga commences in the sun-drenched, yet for Jeff, shadowed landscape of California, circa 2008. At 36, Jeff was less a man finding his way and more a connoisseur of calamity, a virtuoso of ventures gone bust. Imagine him in his cramped, peeling paint apartment in a forgotten corner of Martinez, the relentless California sun outside only highlighting the gloom within. His latest brainchild, Aquapups, a mobile dog washing service operated out of a battered van he'd bought with his last credit card advance, had just gone under. The dogs loved me, he lamented to his exasperated then-girlfriend Tiffany, but the scheduling software, it was a nightmare. And who knew so many people are allergic to lavender-scented dog shampoo? Before Aquapups, there was Cosmic Comics, a mail-order subscription for rare graphic novels that failed when Jeff realized he knew nothing about sourcing rare comics or managing inventory. His life was a highlight reel of entrepreneurial faceplants. The mortgage on the small, EIFS-clad house he'd somehow managed to buy during a more optimistic period was perilously behind. Foreclosure notices lay like fallen leaves on his cluttered kitchen counter. Creditors weren't just calling. Their letters, increasingly aggressive in tone, formed a sedimentary layer on his desk. Mr. Carpoff, one particularly venomous letter from Vulture Capital Recovery Inc. began, "Your persistent delinquency has left us no alternative but to pursue aggressive legal action. Expect to be served." In a particularly desperate, ill-advised phase, he'd even tried his hand as a low-level drug dealer, a venture that imploded due to a combination of his own paranoia, an inability to remember street names, and selling oregano as marijuana, which, while not landing him in jail, certainly didn't endear him to his very limited and very angry clientele. "You're a hazard to yourself, Jeff," Tiffany had sighed, packing her bags. He was by all objective measures a failure artist, painting masterpiece after masterpiece of financial ruin. Then one blazing afternoon, amidst the hum of lawnmowers and the scent of blooming jasmine, a casual chat with his neighbor Bob, a retired aerospace engineer with a penchant for tinkering and perfectly manicured rose bushes, unexpectedly rerouted Jeff's trajectory. Bob, beaming with pride, was showcasing his newly installed rooftop solar panels. "Look at this, Jeff. My meter's practically spinning backward. Clean energy, son. It's the wave of the future. Reducing my carbon footprint, sticking it to the big energy companies. It's a win-win." Jeff, initially feigning interest while his mind replayed the latest threatening voicemail from a debt collector, felt a synaptic spark, a tiny, improbable flicker in the vast darkness of his prospects. Solar panels were static, bolted down. But what if they could roam? "Bob," Jeff interjected, his voice suddenly animated, cutting through Bob's enthusiastic monologue about photovoltaic efficiency. "That's fantastic. But say you're on a construction site, or there's a blackout, or a festival out in the desert. You can't take your roof with you. What if you could bolt those panels onto a trailer? Like a mobile solar generator?" Bob paused, his pruning shears hovering over a prize-winning peace rose. He squinted at Jeff, then up at his solar array, then back at Jeff. "A mobile solar power station. For emergency response, temporary work sites. You know, Jeff, the logistics would be tricky. Battery storage, inverters, durability for transport. But the core idea, it's got legs. Potentially very long legs." That evening, Jeff, fueled by a potent cocktail of desperation, Bob's cautious encouragement, and several cans of cheap energy drink, transformed his cluttered garage into a makeshift R&D lab. His ancient desktop computer, groaning under the strain, became his portal to a new world. He devoured online forums, downloaded grainy PDF schematics of solar arrays, watched shaky YouTube tutorials on wiring inverters. The concept seized him with the fervor of a religious convert, a self-contained mobile power source, a trailer crowned with solar panels, silently converting sunlight into usable electricity. His first prototype, cobbled together from scrap metal, discount panels he'd haggled for at a closing-down electronics store, and a surprising amount of duct tape, looked like something a post-apocalyptic scavenger might have built. It was unwieldy, inefficient, and prone to inexplicable shutdowns if a bird cast a shadow on the wrong panel. But when it did work, when it powered a string of salvaged Christmas lights he draped over a dusty bicycle, it felt like witnessing magic. "Eureka!" he yelled to the empty garage, the flickering lights making his shadow dance like a madman. "This isn't just an idea, it's a revolution. $1 billion revolution." With a surge of manic optimism that bordered on delusion, he used the last of his available credit to file a provisional patent application. The monumental flaw in Jeff's billion-dollar vision, however, was Jeff himself. As an ex-methamphetamine user whose most notable skill was an uncanny ability to talk his way out of, or into, trouble, he possessed the salesmanship of a seasoned grifter, but lacked the meticulous engineering discipline his invention demanded. He was a big-picture guy, a conceptual artist of enterprise, not a nuts-and-bolts technician. His mobile generators, these supposed heralds of a green energy future, were dangerously temperamental. One unit, let's call it Old Faithful, a name given in bitter irony by his sole, perpetually harassed technician Dale, might grudgingly produce a respectable output on a Monday, only to play dead on Tuesday, offering nothing but a faint electrical hum and a worrying smell of ozone. Another, fresh off the assembly line, a corner of his garage, might power a drill for precisely 17 minutes before the inverter gave a sad, expensive sigh and died. "They're just sensitive to atmospheric conditions," Jeff would bluster when Dale presented him with yet another fried circuit board. Pioneering technology is always a bit finicky at first, yet such trivialities as consistent functionality and basic safety were not about to derail the freight train of Jeff Carpoff's ambition. He christened his venture DC Solar, a name that sounded solid, dependable, forward-thinking. He was going to unleash these solar behemoths upon the world, working or not, with a potent blend of unshakable, if unwarranted, self-belief and the sheer force of personality that often accompanies those with little else to lose. He charmed his way into a small business loan from a local community bank. The loan officer, a bright-eyed recent MBA named Melissa, was more captivated by Jeff's passionate rhetoric about eco-friendly solutions and disaster relief than by the crayon-like sketches he presented as technical blueprints. "The green sector is poised for explosive growth, Mr. Carpoff," Melissa had declared, stamping his application with approval. "We're thrilled to support visionaries like you." Jeff then engaged Momentum Marketing Solutions, a fledgling agency run by two hyper-caffeinated millennials who promised to make DC Solar synonymous with mobile power. Their glossy brochures, featuring digitally enhanced images of the generators operating flawlessly in idyllic, sun-drenched, and entirely fictional settings, began to circulate. And then, to Jeff's own profound surprise, the strategy started to yield results. A trickle of interest came from small construction firms, outdoor event organizers, and a few off-grid enthusiasts. A landscaping company leased 2 units for a large rural project. Both units failed spectacularly within 48 hours, one of them emitting a rather dramatic plume of acrid smoke. "User error," Jeff had barked down the phone at the furious project manager. "These are sophisticated pieces of equipment. You can't just treat them like common generators. Did you read the manual?" There was no comprehensive manual. A couple of years of this precarious balancing act later, in 2010, Jeff struck pure, unadulterated gold. Not through an engineering breakthrough, but through a serendipitous discovery in the dense labyrinth of the U.S. tax code. He unearthed a provision from the George W. Bush era, the Investment Tax Credit, ITC, specifically Section 48. This program was designed to incentivize corporate investment in renewable energy by offering substantial tax credits. As Jeff read the fine print, a slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. The kind of grin that usually precedes someone realizing they found a royal flush in a high-stakes poker game. "Paulette, come look at this," he called to his wife. Paulette, a woman who had weathered Jeff's previous business implosions with a mixture of exasperation and reluctant loyalty, was initially skeptical of DC Solar, but the recent, albeit modest income had softened her stance. She peered over his shoulder at the highlighted government document. "Tax credits for solar." "So?" Jeff's voice was electric with excitement. "So? Paulette, don't you see? These big companies, they're drowning in profits, and they hate paying taxes. They don't necessarily need the electricity from my generators. They need the write-off. They need to demonstrate they're investing in green energy. What if, what if they don't really care if the generator is powering a small town or just, you know, decorating their back lot? As long as they get that sweet, sweet tax credit. Paulette's eyes widened slowly. You mean they'd pay for them, even if they're not perfect? Perfect? Jeff scoffed. Honey, they'll pay for them if they're barely breathing, as long as the paperwork is in order. This isn't about saving the planet anymore, Paulette. This is about saving them money and making us a fortune. This cynical revelation was the cornerstone of his new, far more lucrative business model. He pivoted his sales pitch with the agility of a seasoned acrobat. Gone was the technical jargon about solar conversion efficiency. In its place was a compelling narrative about maximizing ROI through government incentives. Big corporations, Jeff theorized with a predatory gleam in his eye, were fundamentally driven by avarice. They wouldn't perform exhaustive due diligence on the operational capabilities of his janky, unreliable solar trailers if the tax benefits were sufficiently enticing. They wouldn't meticulously inspect every circuit if the government was effectively subsidizing their green investment. Jeff could continue, no, he could escalate the production of his demonstrably subpar product and rake in unimaginable profits. And that, with sociopathic single-mindedness, is precisely what he proceeded to do. He refined his pitch, practicing in front of the mirror, transforming into a smooth-talking evangelist of tax avoidance. He hired a few more salespeople, equally skilled in the art of obfuscation. The contracts began to roll in, larger now, from more established businesses, regional trucking companies, agricultural conglomerates, manufacturing plants, all eager to reduce their tax burdens. The generators, many of which were now little more than empty shells with a cosmetic layer of solar panels, were shipped out, often to remote corporate facilities where they were parked and promptly forgotten. Their true purpose, tax reduction, fulfilled upon delivery. Then in 2011, the deal arrived that would forever alter DC Solar's destiny, catapulting it from a borderline scam into a veritable money-printing machine. Sherwin-Williams, the global paint behemoth, a pillar of American industry, agreed to a lease deal for $29 million worth of Jeff's mobile solar generators. $29 million. Jeff felt a dizzying rush of triumph when the contracts, thick with clauses and corporate letterhead, were signed. The executives at Sherwin-Williams, Jeff shrewdly surmised, had little intention of actually relying on his contraptions to power their sprawling paint manufacturing facilities. They craved the tax credit, the green PR, the satisfying chunk it would carve out of their corporate tax liability. For Jeff, it was manna from heaven. He wasn't selling reliable electricity, he was selling the illusion of green investment. And for that illusion, he was now a multimillionaire. A different man standing at this crossroads, enriched by an unexpected $29 million windfall, might have experienced a flicker of prudence, perhaps even a twinge of conscience. Such a man might have thought, this tax credit strategy is a golden goose. Now let's use this capital to actually build the world's best mobile solar generators. Let's hire brilliant engineers, perfect the technology, create a truly sustainable, ethical business. Jeff Carpoff was not that man. The very notion of plowing his newfound riches back into tedious research and development seemed an absurd waste of perfectly good spending money. Why struggle to perfect a product when its manifest imperfections were proving so astonishingly profitable? Jeff's mind, instead, was already racing towards more flamboyant applications of his wealth. But we'll return to his unique philosophy of personal finance in due course. The Sherwin-Williams agreement, however, contained a standard, yet for Jeff, terrifying contractual obligation, a quality inspection of the generators. This was not a minor inconvenience. It was a potential catastrophe. Jeff's generators, to put it charitably, were about as likely to pass a rigorous quality inspection as a snowball in a furnace. They were, in a word, crap. Thus Jeff, drawing on his innate talent for deception, orchestrated a meticulously planned charade, a piece of corporate theater that would become a recurring motif in DC Solar's operations. All right, listen up, people, Jeff announced, pacing before his small, perpetually stressed assembly and repair crew in the cavernous, poorly lit warehouse that served as DC Solar's production hub. Operation Trojan Horse is a go. The suits from Sherwin-Williams are descending on Thursday. We need to put on a show. A goddamn Broadway quality performance. His lead technician, Gary, a man whose permanently furrowed brow and grease-stained overalls told a story of constant battles against faulty wiring and Jeff's unrealistic demands, sighed audibly. Jeff, you know as well as I do that maybe a dozen of these units are what you'd call fully operational. And that's if the wind blows in the right direction and we sacrifice a goat. The Series C inverters are still back-ordered, and half the battery arrays won't hold a charge overnight. Jeff threw an arm around Gary's shoulder, his voice radiating a confidence he didn't entirely feel. That's where the magic happens, my friend. The art of illusion. We take those golden dozen, the ones that actually, generate electricity today. We buff them till they shine like the top of the Chrysler building, and we position them right at the goddamn front of the inspection line. Center stage. Floodlights on them. The rest of them, the temperamental artists of the generator world, we strategically relocate those beauties to the darkest, most inaccessible corners of this warehouse, behind those stacks of old pallets. Maybe throw some tarps over a few. Tell the inspectors there are next-generation prototypes still under wraps, too secret to unveil. Dale, another long-suffering technician, muttered, "More like too broken to show." Positive mental attitude. Dale, Jeff boomed, "We're selling a dream here." So when the delegation from Sherwin-Williams, a trio of stern-faced executives in impeccably tailored suits, arrived for their inspection, they were treated to a carefully choreographed tour. They were guided past a gleaming row of DC Solar's finest, the handful of generators that, through a combination of Gary's frantic last-minute repairs and sheer dumb luck, were actually humming and displaying encouraging green lights on their control panels. The truly representative units, the silent, sparking, or entirely hollow ones, were discreetly hidden from view, like embarrassing relatives at a fancy wedding. The inspectors, likely more preoccupied with the complex financial instruments that would secure their lucrative tax credit than with the finer points of photovoltaic engineering, nodded, ticked off boxes on their clipboards, and expressed their satisfaction. It looked like they all worked great. Jeff, sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning in the small office, watched them depart with a profound sense of relief. Phase 1 complete. But what did it matter, really? All these corporations, from the modest local businesses to the multinational Goliaths like Sherwin-Williams, were primarily chasing the tax credit. No one harbored any deep suspicions that Jeff was engaged in anything more sinister than perhaps aggressive sales tactics and some typical manufacturing corner-cutting. He was set to ride this wave of success for a good while, the money cascading in, the elaborate facade holding remarkably firm. The insidious nature of ill-gotten gains, however, is that they foster an unquenchable thirst for more. The initial tidal wave of cash from the Sherwin-Williams deal and others like it was intoxicating, but Jeff's rapidly expanding lifestyle, coupled with the not insignificant overheads of maintaining the appearance of a legitimate manufacturing operation, even if mostly for show, meant that the inflow, however substantial, was never quite enough. His enterprise, built on the precarious foundations of faulty technology and exploited tax regulations, was like a shark. It had to keep moving forward, keep consuming, or it would die. And so, with the chilling pragmatism of a seasoned con artist facing a narrowing endgame, Jeff Carpoff consciously steered DC Solar from a business model based on selling shoddy goods into the murky, treacherous waters of a full-blown Ponzi scheme. It wasn't an abrupt U-turn, but a gradual, almost imperceptible drift. Money from new investors, ostensibly earmarked for the lease or purchase of brand-new, state-of-the-art solar generators, was increasingly, then entirely, diverted to make lease payments and distribute profits to earlier investors. The illusion of a thriving, hyper-profitable enterprise had to be maintained at all costs, because the moment the music stopped, the entire charade would collapse. And this, too, worked for him. It worked with an efficacy that was both astonishing and terrifying. The allure of green energy tax credits, combined with Jeff's increasingly polished sales pitch, proved an irresistible siren song for corporate America. Over the ensuing 3 years, he purported to sell or lease approximately 160 of his mobile solar generators, each commanding a price tag of around $150,000. The arithmetic was breathtaking. This amounted to a colossal $174 million, a vast river of cash. Of course, a significant percentage of this fortune was immediately channeled back into the gaping maw of the Ponzi scheme, a frantic effort to appease existing investors and perpetuate the myth of DC Solar's Midas touch. By 2014, DC Solar was, by all outward appearances, a titan of the renewable energy sector. Its reputation, carefully cultivated by Jeff and lubricated by an endless flow of investor cash, was glowing. So much so that a prominent regional bank, dazzled by DC Solar's entirely fictitious financial statements and the seemingly insatiable market demand for its products, approached Jeff with a tantalizing proposition. They wanted to partner with DC Solar, offering financing for millions of dollars worth of generator leases to their extensive portfolio of corporate clients. This was a new echelon of legitimacy, a dangerous ascent. But there was a stipulation. To cement this lucrative partnership, the bank required DC Solar to furnish proof of substantial, ongoing contracts with large, nationally recognized end users of its solar technology. Jeff needed a crown jewel, a flagship client whose name alone would inspire confidence. He needed, for instance, to demonstrate a robust contractual relationship with a telecommunications giant like T-Mobile. T-Mobile, stammered Alan Young, the perpetually anxious CFO Jeff had lured away from a respectable mid-sized accounting firm with promises of stock options and a corner office. Alan was already losing sleep over DC Solar's increasingly creative accounting practices. Jeff, we can't just fabricate a contract with T-Mobile. They have armies of lawyers. Their due diligence is legendary. They'll see right through it. Jeff, reclining in his plush, custom-made Italian leather throne of a chair in his expansive, lavishly redecorated office, complete with a burbling water feature and an original, or so he claimed, Warhol, waved a dismissive, bejeweled hand. Alan, my dear Alan, you worry too much. It's merely strategic document creation. We draft a comprehensive master lease agreement. We design some exceptionally impressive deployment schedules, maybe a few schematics for cell tower integration. We might even need to source some authentic-looking T-Mobile letterhead. Minor details, Alan, minor details. The grand vision is what matters. This bank deal will unleash a torrent of capital. Think of the possibilities. Think of your bonus. And so, with the reluctant, terrified assistance of Alan and a few other key insiders, Jeff Carpoff orchestrated the forgery of a multi-million-dollar contract with T-Mobile. Signatures were expertly faked, fictitious email exchanges were crafted, and supporting documentation was conjured from thin air. It was fraud on a grand scale, audacious and utterly illegal. And yet again, with an almost supernatural luck, it worked. The bank, perhaps blinded by the potential profits of the deal and reassured by the sheer brazenness of Jeff's presentation, apparently conducted only a cursory review of the T-Mobile contract. The millions began to flow.
With this new, bank-certified stamp of legitimacy and an apparently inexhaustible river of cash, Jeff's ambition knew no bounds. He aggressively pursued and secured even larger contracts. He inked a monumental $150 million deal with International Speedway Corporation, the conglomerate that owned and operated numerous NASCAR racetracks. Suddenly, DC solar generators, or more accurately the concept of them, were supposedly providing eco-friendly power to the thrilling world of high-octane motorsport. Then came an even more spectacular catch. Geico, the insurance behemoth with its ubiquitous gecko mascot, signed on for a jaw-dropping $1.2 billion lease agreement, spread over several years. $1.2 billion. Jeff Carpoff, the man who once couldn't successfully sell artisanal jerky or premium dog shampoo, was now the celebrated CEO of DC Solar, a purported billion-dollar renewable energy company, a company whose entire glittering edifice was precariously balanced on a rotten foundation of a Ponzi scheme, built around a core product that was, charitably speaking, technologically challenged, if it existed at all, beyond a serial number on an invoice. And this entire fantastical construction was made possible because corporate America, in its ravenous pursuit of those tantalizingly sweet tax credits, had conveniently chosen to avert its gaze from the glaring inconsistencies and a product that barely functioned. They weren't just failing to kick the tires, They were actively avoiding looking under the hood, content to simply pocket the government-issued checks. So, what does a man like Jeff Carpoff do when he finds himself at the helm of a fraudulent, yet ostensibly billion-dollar empire? He indulges, he buys, he consumes, he buys everything. The earlier trickle of extravagant spending now became a raging, uncontrollable deluge. Houses were acquired with the casual frequency of someone picking up dry cleaning. There was the sprawling $1.4 million ranch-style estate in Martinez, California, complete with horse stables. Jeff didn't own horses, but it seemed like the sort of thing a tycoon should have. Then, a more ostentatious $2.5 million Mediterranean villa in Lafayette, boasting a palm-lined driveway, a shimmering turquoise pool, and a professional-grade tennis court. Jeff didn't play tennis. He snapped up 2 opulent condos at a ski resort in Lake Tahoe for nearly $4 million, perfect for impressing guests, though he rarely visited. Not content with mere individual residences, he purchased an entire apartment building in the nearby town of Vacaville for $3.5 million, perhaps as a misguided attempt at diversifying his portfolio. In total, Jeff Carpoff amassed a staggering 32 properties. 32. Each acquisition was another hit of the drug of success, another tangible brick in the fortress of his ego. He and Paulette would wander through newly acquired mansions, planning imaginary galas, Jeff gesturing expansively. "We'll put the Picasso here, Paulette, and the Ming vase over there." Or was it the other way around? Paulette, now fully accustomed to the dizzying wealth, would nod approvingly, her earlier anxieties drowned in a sea of champagne and diamonds. And the automobiles. Oh, the glorious, gleaming automobiles. Jeff cultivated a passion, an obsession, for classic and luxury cars that bordered on the pathological. His collection swelled to an astonishing 150 vehicles. 15. What, pray tell, does one individual do with 150 cars? They became a legend in Martinez and beyond, a gleaming metallic hoard housed in several specially acquired, climate-controlled warehouses that resembled private automotive museums. There were fleets of vintage Corvettes, rows of pristine Porsches, prides of roaring Ferraris, coteries of elegant Rolls-Royces, and battalions of American muscle cars from every conceivable era. He became a fixture at high-end car auctions, his paddle waving with imperious confidence, routinely outbidding seasoned collectors with a cavalier disregard for escalating prices. "That '67 Shelby GT 500? Mine," he'd declare, a triumphant glint in his eye. Sometimes late at night, he would wander alone through his car sanctuaries, the scent of polished leather and high-octane fuel filling his nostrils, a modern-day Gatsby surveying his kingdom of chrome and steel. But Jeff's voracious appetite for acquisition extended beyond inanimate objects. He bought a semi-pro baseball team, the Martinez Clippers, installing himself as their benevolent, if somewhat clueless, owner. He'd attend their games resplendent in a custom Clippers jacket, ensconced in the owner's box, magnanimously waving to the small crowds, feeling every inch the local hero, the community benefactor. "These boys have heart," he'd boom to anyone within earshot. He also poured vast sums of money into the high-visibility world of NASCAR, sponsoring a race car. There it was, his company logo, DC Solar, emblazoned in bold letters on the hood and flanks of a speeding stock car, a blur of color and branding hurtling around the track at 200 miles per hour, broadcast into millions of homes. The thrill of seeing his company's name intertwined with the adrenaline-fueled spectacle of professional motorsport was an unparalleled ego boost, a weekly televised validation of his fraudulent genius. His company Christmas parties became events of mythic proportion, extravagant bacchanals designed to bedazzle his employees, impress potential investors, and project an unshakable image of monumental success and boundless generosity. No expense was deemed too great. He'd rent out the most opulent ballrooms, commission elaborate ice sculptures, often in the shape of DC solar generators, an irony apparently lost on him, and ensure that champagne and gourmet food flowed in unending torrents. For entertainment, he didn't settle for a local DJ. He paid top dollar for A-list performers. The pinnacle of this corporate largesse was the year he secured the services of the internationally acclaimed rapper, singer, and global party ambassador Pitbull to headline the DC Solar Christmas Extravaganza. The lead-up to the Pitbull party was electric. Invitations, printed on cardstock so thick it felt like a small plank, hinted at a night of unparalleled revelry. The chosen ballroom was a spectacle of silver and midnight blue, with shimmering drapes, laser light shows, and go-go dancers in futuristic solar-themed outfits. Jeff, resplendent in a tuxedo that probably cost more than his first failed business, moved through the throng like a conquering hero, backslapping, handshaking, his voice booming over the din. Welcome, welcome. Tonight, we celebrate DC Solar. The future is bright, my friends. The future is solar. Then, the house lights dimmed. A heart-thumping bass line kicked in, smoke billowed across the stage, and to a roar of astonished delight from the assembled employees and guests, Pitbull himself exploded into view, launching into Give Me Everything. The energy was thermonuclear. Mr. Worldwide, in his trademark sunglasses and sharp suit, commanded the stage, his infectious enthusiasm whipping the crowd into a frenzy. Jeff, positioned strategically near the front, a glass of vintage Dom Perignon in hand, felt a surge of almost unbearable pride. He had willed this into existence. This was his triumph. During a brief interlude, Jeff, leveraging his status as the man signing the very large check, managed to get backstage. Pitbull, toweling off, ever the professional, greeted him with a charismatic smile. "Mr. Carpoff, hell of a party you got here, man. Your people know how to get down." Jeff, practically vibrating with excitement, clasped Pitbull's hand. "Armando, what can I say? You're a legend. DC Solar, we're all about bringing that positive energy. Just like you, we're powering the future." Pitbull, smoothly deflecting the hyperbole, replied, "That's the spirit. Keep that energy high. Keep dreaming big." "Dale!" They clinked glasses. For Jeff, this moment, this fleeting interaction with global superstardom, underwritten by his colossal fraud, was the absolute zenith. The sheer unmitigated audacity of Jeff Carpoff's ever-expanding scams reached a new, almost unbelievable crescendo when even the United States federal government was duped. In 2016, in a move that would later cause considerable embarrassment, the U.S. Department of Transportation, under its then-secretary, publicly announced that it had selected DC Solar, Jeff's innovative company, for a significant government contract. The contract involved providing mobile solar power solutions for various transportation infrastructure projects. How Jeff, whose generators were notoriously unreliable and, in many cases, existed only as accounting entries, intended to fulfill the demanding requirements of a federal contract remains a subject of bewildered speculation. Perhaps he envisioned a grander version of his Sherwin-Williams inspection charade, a Potemkin village of functioning generators for government eyes only. Or perhaps by this stage, he was so deeply immersed in his own fabricated reality, so high on the fumes of his own success, that he genuinely believed DC Solar could conjure functioning technology out of thin air. Whatever his delusion, the fact remained. Jeff Carpoff had managed to fool everyone, from the sharpest minds in corporate finance to the supposedly rigorous vetting processes of the federal government. And as if this intricate tapestry of deceit wasn't already complex and damning enough, Jeff, now seemingly drunk on his own perceived invincibility and the endless river of other people's money, decided to escalate the fraud to an even more brazen level. He began to systematically lie about and outright fabricate the very existence of a significant portion of the generators he was selling or leasing. He understood a critical vulnerability in his scheme. When corporations engaged with DC Solar, their primary focus was almost invariably on the tax credits and the associated paperwork. Few, if any, conducted thorough physical audits to verify that each generator listed on an invoice, each serial number on a lease agreement, actually corresponded to a tangible, functioning piece of hardware. These busted, unreliable, and increasingly ethereal generators were, according to DC Solar's falsified records, either safely stored in Jeff's ever-expanding network of warehouses or already deployed at fictitious client sites, silently and non-existently generating power. In 2017, a banner year for DC Solar's fraudulent activities, the company might have had, at most, 6,000 physical generator units in various states of repair, disrepair, or outright non-functionality. Yet, through a sophisticated campaign of cooked books, forged documents, and sheer brazen invention, DC Solar reported that it had sold, or leased, over 17,000 units. He was, quite literally, selling sunshine and shadows, conjuring assets from the ether to fuel the voracious appetite of his Ponzi scheme. But in Jeff's increasingly distorted worldview, what did it really matter? He presided over $1 billion empire, possessed a fleet of luxury cars that would make a sultan envious, and counted the U.S. government among his satisfied clients. He was, he believed, untouchable, a modern-day Midas, whose touch turned everything, especially other people's investments, into gold for himself. Until, inevitably, the music began to falter. Herein lies the inherent vulnerability of even the most audacious fraud. Jeff Carpoff, for all his cunning, did not operate in a vacuum. DC Solar was a staffed enterprise. It employed engineers, however disillusioned by the demand to make bricks without straw, technicians, weary of endless futile repairs, accountants, some complicit, others increasingly terrified, salespeople, skilled in peddling illusions, and a host of administrative personnel. And these employees, particularly those with access to inventory records, production schedules, and financial statements, could not help but notice the glaring, ever-widening chasm between the company's public claims and its internal reality. They saw the press releases trumpeting record sales of tens of thousands of generators, yet witnessed the assembly lines in the warehouses slow to a crawl, then fall silent, the space increasingly used to merely shuffle around the same old decaying units. How, they whispered in hushed tones in the break rooms and over anxious after-work beers, was the company selling products that were demonstrably not being built, that did not physically exist? The Q3 sales report says we shipped 5,000 units to that new Nevada solar farm, one nervous accountant might confide to a warehouse foreman. Funny, the foreman would reply, wiping grease from his hands, because we ain't shipped more than a dozen units anywhere in the last 6 months. And that Nevada solar farm? Pretty sure it's just a patch of desert Jeff pointed at on a map. The air in DC Solar's offices grew thick with unspoken anxieties and mounting suspicions. At some critical juncture, the burden of this knowledge, the daily confrontation with blatant illegality, became too much for one DC Solar employee to bear. Perhaps it was a senior engineer, finally broken by the ethical corrosion of being continually asked to sign off on non-existent or non-functional technology. Or maybe it was an accountant, whose professional integrity, though long suppressed, finally rebelled against the sheer scale of the financial fabrication. This individual, whose identity has been commendably protected by the authorities, made a fateful decision. They resigned. But they did not simply walk away and try to forget the nightmare they had been a part of. They gathered their courage, and possibly a trove of incriminating documents, and went directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the federal agency tasked with policing America's financial markets and protecting investors from fraud. They laid bare the entire rotten core of DC Solar, the systematically faulty generators, the forged contracts with phantom clients, the non-existent inventory, the intricate mechanics of the Ponzi scheme. They became a whistleblower, setting in motion the gears of justice that would ultimately bring Jeff Carpoff's glittering empire crashing down. The SEC, as one might imagine, does not treat allegations of billion-dollar Ponzi schemes lightly. An investigation was launched, initially with a discretion that belied its intensity. Teams of forensic accountants began to meticulously dissect DC Solar's convoluted financial records. Tracing the labyrinthine flow of money, investigators discreetly interviewed former and current employees, piecing together the operational realities behind the company's glossy facade. They scrutinized the complex web of lease agreements and investment partnerships. As the evidence accumulated, the staggering magnitude and audacity of the fraud began to crystallize. It became clear that this was far beyond a case of corporate malfeasance. It was one of the largest Ponzi schemes in recent history. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, was brought in, and the investigation shifted into high gear. The net, invisible to Jeff, who was still basking in the glow of his perceived invincibility, was tightening. The dramatic crescendo arrived on a crisp December morning in 2018. It unfolded with the swift, brutal efficiency of a coordinated federal takedown. A veritable legion of federal agents, their dark suits and official windbreakers, a stark contrast to the sunny California morning, descended upon DC Solar's corporate headquarters in Benicia. Simultaneously, a heavily armed FBI SWAT team, employing tactics typically reserved for dangerous criminals, executed a dynamic no-knock raid on Jeff Carpoff's opulent Martinez mansion. Bam! Doors were breached, commands were shouted. Jeff Carpoff, likely still savoring his morning coffee and scheming his next extravagant purchase, was abruptly confronted with the terrifying reality of his downfall. He was arrested, the bewildered expression captured in news photos, a stark departure from the confident, swaggering CEO persona he had so carefully cultivated. His wife, Paulette Karpoff, who the investigation revealed was not merely a passive beneficiary, but an active participant in the financial deceptions, was also taken into custody. The headlines exploded across national news outlets. California couple indicted in massive billion-dollar solar Ponzi scheme. The lurid details that emerged painted a picture of greed and deception on an almost unimaginable scale. Over a span of 8 years, through a complex network of at least 34 investment funds, Jeff and Paulette Karpoff had masterminded a scheme that defrauded investors of an estimated $910 million. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted at trial, Jeff Carpoff opted for a plea deal. He was sentenced to a substantial 30 years in federal prison. Paulette, for her role as a key conspirator, received an 11-year sentence. The remaining assets, the houses, the planes, the 150 classic cars, the jewelry, even the Martinez Clippers baseball team, were seized by the government, destined to be liquidated in a futile attempt to recoup some of the massive losses suffered by the investors. And in a final, surreal, almost comically tragic footnote to this saga of greed and delusion, it was discovered that one of Jeff Carpoff's very last tweets, posted shortly before his world imploded, was a jubilant, self-congratulatory message. He was celebrating, of all people, Pitbull, Mr. 305, Mr. Worldwide, for his electrifying performance at that now infamous DC Solar Christmas party. The tweet, perhaps accompanied by a blurry photo of Pitbull on stage, served as an unwitting epitaph for Jeff Carpoff's reign of error. A fleeting, dazzling moment of manufactured glamour and borrowed prestige, all paid for with stolen money, a final, flamboyant flourish of hubris, just moments before the entire fraudulent edifice was exposed and came crashing spectacularly to the ground. The party, as they say, was well and truly over. The music had stopped and the bill had finally come due,